A young billionaire gives food to a poor girl on a cold night. Years later, after an accident, he's hospitalized in critical condition. A doctor holds his hand and silently says, "Now it's my turn to take care of you." And he is shocked when he hears it. The night was colder than usual. The wind cut like a razor against her little cracked hands. The girl, who didn't even remember her real name, blew warm air between her fingers as she walked close to the walls of the buildings. Maybe the bricks still held some heat from the day. Maybe 6 years old, 7? She wasn't sure. Time on the streets was measured by hunger and sleep, not by days. And today the hunger was louder than normal. The lights on the main avenue flickered, coloring the puddles with red and blue reflections. The city never truly slept, but at that hour, almost midnight, all the good places had closed. Only alleys and fancy restaurants remained, where leftovers, if you were lucky, were better than most. She knew the schedule by heart. The Italian restaurant on the corner threw out its leftovers around midnight and 15 minutes. The employees would come out back, dragging black trash bags. Some pretended not to see her. Others yelled for her to leave. Once in a while, one of them left a bag partially open before walking away. The little girl hid behind the big green dumpster, hugging her knees to her chest. Her thin coat, found in a church donation months ago, no longer offered much protection. The torn socks inside the wrong-size sneakers were damp from the light rain that had fallen earlier. The back door opened with a familiar creak. A man in a white apron dragged 2 heavy bags to the dumpster. She shrank back even more, holding her breath. The man looked around, sighed, and went back inside. He hadn't seen her. Counting to 20, she waited a bit longer before moving. She never approached too quickly. She had learned about the security camera in the corner of the alley and about the cook who sometimes came back for something he had forgotten. She was crawling toward the first bag when she heard, "Is someone there?" The voice was soft, feminine. It didn't sound like an employee's. The girl froze where she was, her heart racing. Getting caught could mean getting taken away, and getting taken away was always worse than staying. "I saw you hiding." The little girl remained motionless, hoping the darkness would be enough, but then a phone flashlight illuminated her face, and she shrank back, shielding her eyes. "Don't be afraid." The light lowered, and then she could see. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, elegantly dressed. She didn't look like a restaurant worker or a police officer. Her dark wool coat seemed warm and expensive, a stark contrast to the cold night. But what caught the girl's attention the most was the pendant. It hung from the woman's neck, swaying slightly as she came closer. Silver, with a clear stone in the center that seemed to glow even in the dim alley light. "Are you looking for food?" The girl didn't answer. Years on the street had taught her that words rarely helped. She stepped back, ready to run. "Wait!" The woman raised her hands, showing she meant no harm. "Are you hungry?" The question felt almost absurd. Hunger wasn't something she had. Hunger was something she was. A constant ache that sometimes lessened but never truly went away. The woman opened her bag and took out a small package wrapped in paper. For a moment, the girl thought it might be food. But then she realized it was just a napkin. The woman used it to wipe a small spot on the steps of the service door, then sat down. "My name is Grace." Her name came out musical, as if announcing something far bigger than just who she was. The little girl stayed where she was, wary but now curious. People like this woman never stopped to talk, never introduced themselves, never sat on dirty steps in dark alleys. "I was having dinner in there," Grace pointed to the restaurant, "and I saw you through the window, waiting." The girl looked down at her own feet, her thin cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Being seen was dangerous. Being noticed was always bad. "You don't have to go through the trash," Grace continued, her voice gentle. "How about we get something hot to eat? There's a 24-hour diner 2 blocks away." The offer sounded absurd, unreal. The little girl had heard stories about people who lured children places and then they never returned. But this woman, with her calm voice and glowing pendant, didn't seem dangerous. And hunger, oh hunger, spoke louder than any survival instinct. "You don't have to talk to me," Grace said, standing up and adjusting her coat. "Just follow if you want, no strings attached." She started walking slowly out of the alley, not looking back. Her footsteps echoed on the damp concrete. 1, 2, 3. The girl counted to 10 before following and keeping a safe distance. The diner was a blast of light after the darkness of the alley. Harsh fluorescent lamps, faded yellow walls, that unmistakable smell of coffee and fried food. A small bell rang when they entered, and the only employee, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard, looked up from his phone. Grace chose a booth in the corner, away from the door and windows. The girl stood still, watching suspiciously. "Have a seat," Grace invited, pointing to the seat across from her. The red vinyl was cracked in places, but it looked like the most comfortable spot the girl had seen in weeks. Slowly, she approached and perched on the edge of the seat, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. The employee came over, pad in hand, eyeing the girl up and down. His look combined distrust and pity. "We'll have 2 specials," Grace said before he could say anything. "With fries, please. Hand 2 hot chocolates." The man nodded and walked away, leaving them alone again. "I hope you like burgers," Grace said with a slight smile. "I love them here. I come sometimes after work." The little girl didn't reply, but her eyes wandered around, memorizing the exits, counting the people. There were only 2 other customers, a man sleeping over a cup of coffee at the counter and an older woman reading a book at the far corner. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Grace didn't ask invasive questions, didn't demand answers. She simply existed in the same space, offering her calm presence. When the food arrived, the girl's stomach growled loudly enough for Grace to hear. A sympathetic smile crossed the woman's face as she pushed the plate toward the girl. "Go easy," she advised softly. "Eating too fast when you're really hungry can make you sick." But the little girl barely heard. Her wide eyes were fixed on the biggest burger she had ever seen. Juicy, steaming, with melted cheese oozing down the sides, and the fries golden, crispy, salty. She grabbed the burger with both hands and took a bite almost too big for her small mouth. The flavor was so intense that tears welled in her eyes. She chewed slowly, savoring every texture, every spice. It was different from leftovers, different from stale charity bread. It was real food. Grace ate her own meal slowly, giving the girl time to finish. When the girl finally cleaned her plate, down to the last crumb, Grace ordered more fries. "There's dessert, too," she said, pointing to the illustrated menu on the wall. "Maybe a piece of pie?" The girl followed her gaze, even though she couldn't read the words. The pictures were enough. Cakes, pies, ice cream, things from another world. A world she couldn't access. Until now. She nodded shyly, and Grace ordered 2 slices of apple pie. They arrived with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting on top, and the girl couldn't hold back a smile. It was then, while they ate dessert, that the girl really looked at Grace. Not with fear or suspicion, but with genuine curiosity. She watched how the woman delicately held her fork, how she smiled between bites, how her silver pendant swayed softly with every movement. The stone in the center of the pendant seemed to change color depending on the light, sometimes bluish, sometimes almost clear. There was something mesmerizing about it, something that made the girl think of clear skies after a storm. "Do you like my necklace?" Grace asked, noticing the girl's fixed stare. The girl looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring, but Grace didn't seem bothered. "It was a gift from my grandmother," she explained, touching the pendant affectionately. "She used to say the stone is a little piece of the sky, to remind me always to look up, even on difficult days." The girl didn't understand how something could be a piece of the sky, but she liked the idea. Looking up, she rarely did that. On the streets, looking down was safer, more practical. You found coins on the ground, not in the sky. After they finished eating, Grace asked for the check. While they waited, she pulled something from her bag, a small emergency blanket, the kind that looks like aluminum foil. "This keeps in your body heat really well," she said, extending it to the girl. "It's small but it helps on cold nights." The little girl hesitated before taking it. Gifts always had a price. Always. But Grace just smiled, not asking for anything in return. "Do you have somewhere to sleep tonight?" The question came softly, without judgment. The girl thought about the gap between 2 buildings, where she had spent the last few nights. It wasn't a place, not really, but it was what she had. She nodded anyway. Grace seemed like she wanted to say more, but held back. She paid the bill, leaving a generous tip, and stood up. "We should go," she said gently. "It's really late." Outside, the night felt less cold now. A full belly gave the girl a pleasant weight in her stomach, a warmth spreading from inside out. The silver blanket, though thin, was folded carefully in her hands. They stopped at the corner where their paths would separate. "Will you be okay?" Grace asked, the concern clear in her voice. The little girl nodded. Being okay was relative. She always managed. "Maybe we'll see each other again." Grace smiled, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "Take care." And then she left, walking toward the main avenue, her elegant silhouette disappearing under the city lights. The girl stood there, watching until Grace turned the corner and vanished. Alone again, the girl clutched the blanket to her chest. But something was different now. The world around her was the same tall, indifferent buildings, the same dangerous streets, the same uncertain future. But inside her, a small change had happened. For the first time in a long while, maybe for the first time ever, she felt something besides fear and hunger, something light and warm, like the stone in Grace's pendant. Hope. As she walked back to her spot between the buildings, the girl tried looking up at the night sky, partially obscured by the city lights. A few stubborn stars still shone, distant but present. Maybe, she thought as she wrapped herself in the silver blanket, maybe the world wasn't just cold and hunger. Maybe there were people like Grace, with magic pendants and kind smiles. Maybe there was a possibility she had never considered before. The possibility that one day things could be different. With that thought, the girl closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, sleep came easily, not interrupted by the discomfort of hunger. And for the first time in years, she dreamed of something other than surviving the next day. She dreamed of blue skies and silver pendants. She dreamed of possibilities. 3 days passed since that meeting with Grace. For most people, 3 days was nothing, just a blink in the constant flow of time. But for a street girl, it was 72 hours of survival, 72 hours of battling cold, hunger, and fear. And, for the first time, 72 hours of a memory that warmed her more than any blanket could. The emergency silver blanket Grace had given her was carefully folded inside her battered backpack, the only possession the girl truly considered hers. She didn't use it to sleep, despite the cold that set in every night. She was afraid someone would steal it while she slept, or that it would tear from use. It was too valuable to risk losing. Instead, she touched it sometimes, just to make sure it was still there, to remind herself that night had been real, that Grace, the woman with the silver pendant and the kind smile, hadn't just been a good dream in the midst of so many nightmares. The girl had no name. Or rather, she probably once had one, but it had been so long since anyone used it that the word itself was lost in the fog of her earliest memories. On the streets, she responded to anything. Girl, kid, hey you. Names were for people who belonged somewhere. She belonged nowhere, at least until now. On the morning of the 4th day after meeting Grace, the girl woke earlier than usual. The sun was barely peeking between the tall buildings, painting the sky a pale pink that would soon be swallowed by the city's grey. She stretched, feeling her muscles protest at the hard ground she had slept on. Her stomach growled, reminding her of reality. The burger and pie from the diner were now just a distant memory, a ghost taste that sometimes returned when she licked her lips. The hunger, always present, was back with full force. Still, something felt different. She caught herself looking at the sky, searching for that particular shade of blue that reminded her of the stone in Grace's pendant. And as she walked the streets in search of something to eat, she didn't keep her eyes glued to the ground like before. Now, she looked at people's faces. She was searching. Not that she expected to find Grace again. The city was too big, with thousands of anonymous faces passing by every day. Finding her would be like searching for a specific coin in the ocean. But the possibility, however small, fueled something inside her. Something new. Hope was too big a word for her to name, but that was exactly what was growing, small and persistent, in her chest. That morning, she found a fruit cart being set up. The vendor, busy arranging the goods, didn't notice when she picked up a slightly bruised apple that had rolled onto the ground. It wasn't stealing if it was already on the ground, right? At least that's what she told herself as she walked away quickly, heart pounding. Sitting on a park bench, eating the apple slowly to make it last, the girl watched the people around her, men in suits rushing, women carrying shopping bags, children in uniforms going to school. All of them belonged somewhere. All of them had a destination. What if I could be one of them, she thought, surprising even herself. Before Grace, such a thought would never have crossed her mind. Before that night in the diner, her biggest dream was finding enough food to not go to sleep with a stomachache. But now, she found herself imagining what it would be like to have a name. What it would be like to sleep in a bed. What it would be like not to worry about the next meal or the next safe place to spend the night. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" The voice startled her. An older woman with gray hair was watching her from the other end of the bench, her lined face showing concern. The girl hadn't realized she was crying, tears rolling down her dirty cheeks. "Are you lost?" The girl shook her head no. How could she explain that she'd been lost for so long she no longer remembered what it felt like to have a path? The older woman seemed to understand anyway. She opened her purse and took out a wrapped cereal bar, offering it with a sad smile. "Here. It's not much, but maybe it'll help a little." The girl hesitated only for a second before taking the food. She mumbled a "thank you" so low she wasn't sure the woman heard it. It was hard accepting kindness. Harder still was believing there wasn't some hidden price. But ever since Grace, something had changed. Maybe, just maybe, there were more good people in the world than she had imagined. The older woman left after one last worried glance, leaving the girl alone again with her thoughts and the cereal bar. She placed it in her backpack, next to the silver blanket. For later, for when hunger became unbearable. The following days went by in the same pattern. Survive, look for food, find a safe place to sleep. But now there was a subtle difference. The girl began noticing small acts of kindness around her. The baker who accidentally left a loaf of bread on the sidewalk when he saw her passing by. The newsstand lady who offered her a cup of water on hot days. Even the security guard who looked the other way when she took shelter in a building entrance on rainy nights. Had these people always been like this, and she just never noticed? Or was the world changing? Or perhaps this was the scariest thought. She was the one who was changing. The memory of Grace became her shield on hard days. When hunger was too strong, when the cold seemed to seep into her bones, when fear threatened to overwhelm her, she closed her eyes and remembered. The silver pendant shining under the diner's lights, the taste of hot chocolate, the soft touch of the blanket. The feeling of being treated like a person, not a problem. Grace had planted a seed that night, a seed of dignity. And despite the barren ground and harsh conditions, that seed was slowly, quietly starting to grow. For the first time, the girl began to dream beyond the next day. She began to wonder, what if? What if there was a place for her? What if one day she could be like Grace, helping someone who needed it? What if I could be somebody? The question came in a whisper as she crouched in an alley, counting the coins she'd managed to collect during the day. 6. Enough for a loaf of bread? Maybe. Not enough for a real meal. Certainly not enough to change her life. But the question persisted. What if I could be somebody? She didn't know what it meant to be somebody. She didn't know what it meant to have a place in the world. But now, thanks to Grace, she knew what it felt like to be treated as someone who mattered. And that knowledge was both a gift and a curse. It showed her everything she had never had. 2 weeks after meeting Grace, the girl's luck changed drastically, not for the better at first. The day began with a heavy rain, the kind that seemed determined to wash the entire city. She sheltered as best she could under the overhang of a closed store, but she still got soaked. The silver blanket, her most precious treasure, remained dry in her backpack, protected by a plastic bag. She herself wasn't so lucky. By afternoon, when the rain finally let up, the girl went out looking for food. She was weaker than usual. She hadn't eaten anything but half a stale piece of bread since the day before. Hunger caused dark spots at the edges of her vision, and her steps were slow, dragging. That's when she spotted a delivery truck parked in front of a small market. The driver was unloading boxes, stacking them on the sidewalk while he waited for someone to help carry them inside. At the top of one stack, a box of apples was open, revealing bright red fruit. The girl's stomach clenched painfully. Just one apple. He wouldn't even notice. And she needed it so badly. Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, she approached slowly, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like everyone could hear it. When she was just a few steps away from the box, she reached out, her trembling fingers almost touching the nearest apple. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The driver's shout caught her by surprise. She jumped back, ready to run, but her legs, weak from hunger and cold, felt like jelly. She stumbled, tried to steady herself, but the dark edges of her vision suddenly closed in. The world spun, then it went black. When she opened her eyes again, she was on the ground. A circle of worried faces hovered above her. The driver, a woman in a store apron, some bystanders, their voices sounded far away, as if talking underwater. Fainted like that. Looks like she hasn't eaten in days. Call an ambulance. She's just a child, for God's sake. The girl tried to get up, panicking. Ambulance meant hospital. Hospital meant questions. Questions meant authorities. And authorities meant... She didn't know exactly what they meant, but the fear was instinctive, deep. She'd heard stories from other street kids, stories about bad foster homes, cold institutions, about being just a number in a system that didn't care. "Easy, honey, it's okay." The woman from the store knelt beside her, offering a cup of water. "Drink slowly." The cool water eased her dizziness a bit. The girl looked around, searching for her backpack. It was there, near her feet. At least they hadn't taken it. "I already called social services," the driver said, sounding closer now. "They'll be here soon." Panic returned, stronger. The girl tried to stand again, but the storewoman gently held her shoulder. "Hey, it's all right. Nobody's going to hurt you. You need help." "I don't need help." The words came out in a hoarse whisper, breaking the silence she usually imposed on herself. "I'm fine." But her body betrayed her. She trembled from cold and weakness, and hunger made it hard even to keep her eyes open. 20 minutes later, a car pulled up to the curb. A middle-aged woman got out, holding a folder. Her face was ordinary, nothing remarkable, but her eyes had a kindness that reminded the girl of Grace. "Hello," she said, approaching and crouching to the girl's level. "My name is Sarah. I'm here to help." The girl didn't respond, but she also didn't try to run again. She was too tired for that. "Do you have somewhere to go?" "Someone we can call." Somewhere. She had her favorite spots in alleys, gaps between buildings that offered some shelter from the wind, but a real place, someone waiting for her. She shook her head no. Sarah sighed, not with irritation, but with a contained sadness. "Then how about coming with me? We have a shelter not far from here. Hot food, a bath, a clean bed. At least for tonight. What do you think?" The offer was tempting, more tempting than Sarah could know, but the fear was still there, deeply rooted. "I don't," the girl began, but didn't know how to finish. She didn't want to go. That wasn't true. She didn't trust them, yes, but after Grace and something had changed, maybe not everyone wanted to hurt her. "You can take your things," Sarah pointed to the backpack, "and you can leave any time you want. It's not a prison. It's just a safe place to recover." The girl hesitated, looking at the sky. Dark clouds were gathering again. The rain would return soon, and she was so tired, so cold, so hungry. Slowly, she reached for her backpack and slipped it over her shoulders. Then, with a slight nod, she agreed to go with Sarah. The shelter was about a 10-minute drive. It was an old building with peeling paint in some places, but it was clean and well-maintained. A simple sign read, "New Hope Center." Hope. The word made her think of Grace again, of silver pendants and blue skies. Inside, the place was more welcoming than she expected. Pale-colored walls, some decorated with children's drawings, simple tables and chairs in good condition, and the smell, an unmistakable aroma of real food that made her stomach rumble loudly. An older woman with grey hair in a loose bun came to greet them, Her name was Mrs. Martha, and she seemed to be in charge. "Welcome, dear," she said, smiling at the girl. "So you must be hungry. Let's take care of that first, okay?" The girl was led to a small dining area, where a hot bowl of soup with chunks of vegetables and meat was waiting for her, along with a generous piece of bread. She ate slowly, savoring every spoonful, while Sarah spoke quietly with Mr. Martha in a corner of the room. After the meal, the first complete one since that night with Grace, the girl was shown to a clean bathroom where she could take a hot shower. Clean clothes waited for her: a simple t-shirt, soft sweatpants, and new socks. They weren't brand new, clearly used before, but they were in good shape and, more importantly, clean. When they finally took her to a small room with 2 single beds, only one occupied by another girl who was already asleep, the child felt a strangeness she couldn't name. It wasn't fear, not exactly, more like the discomfort that comes with something so new. "You can put your things here." Mr. Martha showed her a small dresser by the empty bed. "No one will touch them, I promise." The girl looked at her battered backpack, which held everything she owned in the world: the silver blanket from Grace, some coins, a broken comb, and a small one-armed rag doll she'd found long ago in the trash and hadn't had the heart to abandon. Slowly, she set the backpack beside the pillow instead of putting it in the dresser. An old habit from someone who always had to be ready to run. "That's all right," Ms. Martha smiled understandingly. "Good night, dear. Rest well." As soon as the door closed, leaving only the soft glow of a bedside lamp, the girl lay down. The mattress was soft, too soft for someone used to a hard floor. The clean sheets smelled pleasantly of soap. The pillow cradled her head like a cloud. She couldn't sleep. Everything was too strange. The warmth, the comfort, the safety. Her body, used to always being on alert, didn't know how to fully relax. Her ears, trained to detect the smallest sound of danger, were unnerved by the near silence, broken only by the gentle breathing of the other girl. But gradually, exhaustion overpowered the strangeness. Her eyes grew heavy, her body relaxed against her will. And before she completely drifted off, she reached a hand to her backpack, touching the outline of the silver blanket through the fabric. "Thank you, Grace," she whispered into the quiet room, because somehow she knew. If not for that night in the diner, if not for the kindness of that stranger with the silver pendant, she never would have found the courage to trust again. She never would have accepted Sarah's help, never would have agreed to come to this place. Grace had planted more than a seed of dignity. She had planted the possibility of a future where the girl wasn't just a shadow on the streets, surviving day to day. A future where she could, maybe, become someone. And with that comforting thought, the girl finally fell asleep. For the first time in years, without fear of tomorrow. The girl stayed exactly 43 days at the shelter. Not that she was counting, the staff were the ones who kept track of each child, but it was 43 days of quiet transformation. In the first few weeks, she slept clutching her backpack, woke at the slightest noise, and ate as if every meal might be her last. The shelter workers respected her space, understood her fear. They didn't force her to speak when she didn't want to, didn't make her join activities with the other kids. Ms. Martha, especially, seemed to understand. "Some flowers take longer to bloom," she would say, while braiding the girl's hair, now clean and shiny. "But when they do, they're the prettiest." Little by little, the girl learned to trust. Not completely. She still kept a core of caution that might never fully go away, but enough to ask about the name of a book, to smile when someone offered her an extra piece of cake, to sleep through the night without waking in panic. The shelter had rules, schedules, structure, things she'd never had on the streets. At first, it felt suffocating. Then, comforting. Knowing lunch would be at noon, that the shower would always have hot water, that someone would stop by at night to wish a good night, there was security in that predictability. On the 30th day, Sarah, the social worker who found her, came with news. The girl was sitting alone in the shelter's patio, watching ants at work in the dirt, when Sarah approached. "Hi, sweetie," Sarah smiled, sitting on the bench beside her. "Can I tell you something?" The girl nodded, curious. Sarah seemed different today. There was a suppressed energy in her gestures, a sparkle in her eyes. There's a couple who wants to meet you. They're looking to adopt a child, and when they heard about you, they were very interested. The word adopt made the girl's heart race. Adoption meant family. Family was something that existed in stories and dreams, not in real life, not in her life. They'll come here tomorrow, Sarah went on, just to talk, to meet you. No pressure, okay? If you don't like them, that's all right. You don't have to go with anyone you don't want. The girl nodded again, but her mind raced. That night, she couldn't sleep. She imagined what these people might be like, what they'd ask, what they'd expect from her. What if they didn't like her? What if she didn't know how to be a daughter? On the streets, she had learned to be invisible. What if being seen, truly seen, every day was too much? The next morning, she wore the nicest outfit she'd received at the shelter, a simple blue dress with little flowers embroidered around the collar. Ms. Martha made 2 braids in her hair and kissed her forehead. "Remember," the older woman said, tucking in a stray lock, "just be who you are. Don't try to be what you think they want. The right people will love you just as you are." The girl waited in the small visiting room of the shelter, her palms sweaty, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear. When the door opened, she held her breath. The couple who entered was nothing like she'd imagined. They weren't young and stylish like the parents on TV commercials. The woman was average height, with short brown hair and a round face creased with small laugh lines, smile lines, the girl would later think. The man was tall and thin, wearing thick-rimmed glasses, with graying hair at the temples. Both wore simple but well-cared-for clothes. "Hello," the woman said, her voice soft as a feather. "My name is Clara, and this is my husband, Robert." "It's nice to meet you," Robert added, giving a shy smile. The little girl didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. There was something in their demeanor, nothing forced, nothing over the top, that didn't set off any alarm in her street instincts. They sat across from her, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Clara took something out of her purse, a small storybook with a colorful cover. "Sarah told us you like stories," she said. "I thought you might like this one. It's about a girl who finds a secret garden and brings it back to life." The girl took the book carefully, as if it were glass. No one had ever given her a book before. At the shelter, there were shared books for everyone, but none of her own. Is it for me?" Those were her first words, and Clara's smile grew so wide, her eyes almost disappeared. "Yes, sweetheart, it's yours." The conversation flowed more easily after that. Clara was a science teacher at an elementary school. Robert worked as an engineer. They lived in a small but comfortable house with a backyard where they gardened. They had no other children. "We tried for many years," Clara explained, a brief shadow of sadness crossing her face. "Then we realized maybe our family could form in a different way." They didn't ask invasive questions about the girl's past. They didn't demand she talk about the streets or how she ended up at the shelter. Instead, they asked about her likes, favorite colors, favorite stories, whether she liked day or night better. "Night," she answered to that last one, "because you can see the stars." Robert smiled. "I have a telescope. If you want, someday I can show you the constellations. There's one that looks like a swan flying across the sky." The idea was so wonderful the girl could barely imagine it. Seeing stars not from the cold pavement of the streets, but through a device that brought them closer. The visit lasted an hour, but it felt much shorter. When Clara and Robert said goodbye, promising to come back the next day, the girl felt a pang of disappointment. She wished they had stayed longer. They returned the next day, and the next, and the next. For 2 weeks, they showed up every day, sometimes bringing small gifts, a storybook, a drawing of a constellation Robert had made just for her, a small plant that Clara helped her pot. At the end of the second week, Sarah called the girl in for a talk. "Clara and Robert want to adopt you," she said plainly. "They've started the legal process, but the final decision is yours. Do you want to live with them? Do you want them to be your family?" Family. The word still sounded strange, unreal, but when she thought of Clara and her gentle way of explaining things, Robert and his excitement for the stars, yes, maybe that was family, or at least the start of one. She nodded, unable to express the swirl of emotions she felt in words. Another 2 weeks passed in preparations, paperwork, supervised visits to Clara and Robert's home. The girl saw the room that would be hers, small but cozy, with walls painted a soft green, a real bed with a floral comforter, and a window overlooking the backyard. "We can decorate it however you like," Clara said. "It's your space. Your space. Your room. Your family." They were such huge concepts her mind could hardly contain them. Finally, on the 43rd day since she'd arrived at the shelter, the girl picked up her backpack, now holding not just Grace's silver blanket, but also Clara's book, Robert's constellation drawings, and some clothes and small keepsakes from the shelter, and walked out hand in hand with her new parents. "Welcome to your new home," Clara said when they arrived at the house. "Emily?" Emily. The name had been chosen together during one of their visits. Clara and Robert had asked if she remembered her birth name, and when the girl shook her head no, they offered to help her pick a new one. "Emily," she repeated softly, testing the sound. "I'm Emily." Being Emily meant so much more than having a name. It meant having an identity, a place in the world. It meant belonging. The first days were full of adjustments. Emily still woke up in the middle of the night, confused by not being in the shelter or on the streets. She still hid food in her pockets during meals, a street habit that would take time to break. She still tensed up whenever Robert raised his voice, even if it was just from excitement, not anger. But Clara and Robert were patient. If they found hidden food, they didn't scold her. They simply said gently that there would always be more at the next meal. If she woke up scared, one of them would come sit by her bed, sometimes just quietly keeping her company until she fell asleep again. Routine became a key word. Breakfast at 7, school at 8, lunch at noon, homework in the afternoon, dinner at 6, story time at 8, lights out at 9. The predictability she had begun to appreciate at the shelter now became even more solid at home. School was the biggest challenge. Emily had never attended one, or at least didn't remember it. At the shelter, she'd had some basic lessons, enough to recognize letters and numbers, but there were huge gaps in her knowledge. Clara, being a teacher, devoted herself to helping Emily catch up to her grade level. Every afternoon, they worked together at the kitchen table, going over letters, numbers, and words. Emily soaked up knowledge like a thirsty sponge, eager to make up for lost time. "You learn fast," Clara remarked once, watching her finish a math exercise. "You have a sharp mind." The compliment warmed Emily from the inside. No one had ever praised her intelligence before. On the streets, being clever meant only surviving one more day. Robert also helped educate Emily in his own way. On clear nights, as promised, he took her to the backyard with his telescope, pointing out planets and constellations, explaining the stories behind their names. "See that one? It's Andromeda. She was a princess in Greek mythology." Emily loved those lessons under the stars. She loved imagining that the same sky that had covered her on cold, lonely nights could now be a source of wonder and stories. After 6 months with Clara and Robert, Mom and Dad in her mind, though she still hesitated to say the words out loud, Emily officially started school. Clara had pulled some strings and got her into a good public school where a teacher friend could give her special attention. On the first day, Emily was terrified. What if the other kids noticed she was different? What if they learned she'd once been a street kid? What if they laughed at how she sometimes stumbled over simple words or didn't know basic cultural references other normal kids knew? "Just be yourself," Clara advised as she helped style Emily's hair. "And remember, we'll be waiting for you after school. No matter what happens in there, you have a home to come back to. A home, a family." It still felt like a miracle. The first day was hard, but not as bad as Emily feared. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was kind and didn't put her in embarrassing situations. The other kids were mostly just kids, some curious, some indifferent, some potential friends. It was during science class that something clicked inside Emily. Mrs. Patterson talked about Alexander Fleming and the discovery of penicillin, how an accident in the lab ended up saving millions of lives. "Doctors are like detectives," the teacher explained, "always looking for clues to figure out what's wrong and how to fix it." Emily was fascinated, The idea of fixing people, of turning pain into relief, sickness into health, resonated deeply within her. She thought of all the times she'd been sick on the streets with no one to help. She thought of Grace, who fed her when she was hungry, of Sarah, who found her when she fainted, of Miss Martha, who took care of her at the shelter, people who fixed what was broken. That night, over dinner, Emily made an announcement that surprised even herself. "I want to be a doctor when I grow up." Clara and Robert exchanged surprised looks, then smiled. "That's a wonderful profession," Clara said. "Why did you choose that?" Emily thought for a moment, trying to put her feelings into words. "Because I want to help people who are hurt. Like people helped me." It was the first time she referred even indirectly to her past. Robert blinked quickly behind his glasses, and Clara reached across the table, gently squeezing Emily's fingers. "You'll make an amazing doctor," Robert said, his voice a bit choked. That night, in her own bed, in her own room, in her own house, Emily took out the silver blanket Grace had given her so long ago. She no longer kept it hidden. Clara and Robert knew about it, respected its sentimental value. But it was still her personal talisman, her connection to the moment someone truly saw her for the first time. "I'm going to help someone someday," she whispered to the blanket, as if making a promise to Grace. "Like you helped me." Emily knew the path to becoming a doctor would be long and hard. She knew she still had a lot to learn, a lot to overcome. But now she had something she'd never had before, a dream that went beyond immediate survival. A purpose. And most importantly, she had people who believed in her. A family. Emily now understood it was another word for miracle. An everyday miracle, built on small moments. Clara's goodnight kiss, Robert's constellation stories, dinners together with conversation and laughter, the feeling of lying in a bed, knowing it would be there the next night, and the next, and the next. With that comforting certainty around her like a warm blanket, Emily closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be another day. One day closer to finally repaying all the kindness she had received. One more day in her journey to become who she was meant to be. Emily, daughter, student, future doctor, somebody. Emily was 16 when her world fell apart for the second time. The first time felt so distant in her memory that sometimes it seemed it had happened to someone else. That nameless little girl who lived on the streets, scavenging trash, sleeping in alleys. 9 years living with Clara and Robert had layered over that memory, like new pages in a book covering the old ones, but never completely erasing them. Clara's diagnosis came on an ordinary fall day, when the leaves were turning yellow and the air carried that crispness that hinted winter was coming. Pancreatic cancer, already advanced. The words sounded strange, unreal, as if spoken in another language. "How long?" Robert asked the doctor, his voice steady despite his tear-filled eyes. 6 months. Maybe a bit more. It turned out to be 8. 8 months of hope, denial, anger, acceptance, and finally, goodbye. 8 months during which Emily watched her mother, the woman who had saved her with infinite patience, who had taught her to read, who had made her believe in herself, grow weaker each day. Clara faced the disease the way she faced everything in life, with dignity and even a bit of humor. "At least now you can try those recipes I hate," she joked with Robert on a day when chemotherapy completely took away her appetite. She kept teaching until she no longer could, refusing to let the disease define her. At night, when the pain kept her awake, she asked Emily to read aloud, the same books Clara had once read to her. Emily took on many household responsibilities. She followed the carefully noted recipes in Clara's cookbook to make meals. She cleaned the house between study sessions. She learned to administer medications, recognize signs of distress, help with hygiene when her mother became too weak. The irony didn't escape her. She, who had dreamed of being a doctor, was now getting a crash course in palliative care, painful, real, and personal. One night, when Clara was especially weak after a chemo session, Emily was helping her get comfortable in bed. Her trembling hands arranged the pillows, checked the IV line, adjusted the blanket over shoulders that used to be strong enough to carry her. "You're going to be an incredible doctor," Clara whispered, eyes closed from exhaustion. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. How do you know I still want to be a doctor? Clara opened her eyes, a faint smile on her cracked lips. Because I know you better than you know yourself, sweetheart. I see how you watch the nurses, how you read the medication leaflets, how you jot down everything the doctors say. It was true. Even in this terrible moment, Emily couldn't help her clinical curiosity, mixing in with her personal pain. And I know, Clara continued, her voice now just a whisper, that you turn pain into purpose. You always have. The words stayed with Emily, echoing in her mind over the following weeks, as Clara's condition worsened rapidly. Turn pain into purpose. Wasn't that what she'd been doing since she was a little girl on the streets? Turning hunger into determination, loneliness into self-reliance, fear into caution. Clara died one April morning, when the first flowers began to bloom in the garden she loved so much. She passed peacefully in her sleep, at home, with Robert holding one of her hands and Emily the other. It was a quiet parting, no dramatic scenes, just one final soft breath, and then silence. The funeral was small but filled with love. Clara's co-workers from the school, neighbors, some of Emily's friends from her school, and even Sarah, the social worker who had brought Emily into this family years ago, came to say goodbye. Emily stayed strong throughout the ceremony, holding onto Robert's arm. He seemed to have aged 10 years in just a few days. She didn't cry when the casket was lowered, nor when well-meaning people offered condolences that sounded hollow. She didn't cry during the small reception after, while serving coffee and thanking everyone. Only that night, alone in her room, did the dam finally break. Emily cried like she had never cried before, not even on the streets, not even at the shelter. She cried for the mother she lost, for the unfairness of a life so abruptly cut short, for a future without Clara. And she also cried for the little girl she once was, the one who thought she would never have a family, only to lose a part of it again. The old blanket she'd carried since childhood, now faded and patched but still precious, was her comfort that night. She clung to it as she had done so many times on the streets, seeking not physical warmth, but emotional solace from an object that had seen her through so many hardships. The months that followed tested Emily and Robert. The house, once full of Clara's laughter and energy, now felt too big, too quiet. They moved like ghosts, following their routines by inertia, speaking little. Emily threw herself into her studies. Her final year of high school became a marathon of books, extra classes, and college entrance exam prep. She studied until late, woke up early, filled every spare minute. "You need to rest," Robert said one night, finding her bent over a biology book long after midnight. "I need to get into a good med school," Emily said without looking up. "I need a scholarship. I need to be the best." Robert sat in front of her, gently closing the book. "Clara and I saved money for your education, Emily. And there are other types of scholarships and student loans. I don't want you to spend your savings on me," Emily interrupted, her voice trembling. "You and Clara have already done so much." "Emily," Robert sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. "Clara and I never spent anything on you. We invested in our daughter, in our family." The word family caused something inside Emily to break. The tears she'd been holding back in front of Robert poured out, unstoppable. "But she's gone," she sobbed. "Part of our family is gone." Robert came around the table and hugged Emily, his own body shaking with silent sobs. "I know, sweetheart. I know." They stayed like that for a long time, crying together for the first time since the funeral. When they finally calmed down, Robert spoke quietly. "Clara made me promise something before she passed. She asked me to remind you of it in hard times." Emily wiped her tears, looking at him curiously. "She said to tell you that you're stronger than the pain, that you know how to turn sadness into strength, as you've always done." The words were so typically Clara that Emily could almost hear her voice, and somehow it made all the difference. That night, lying in bed, Emily pondered what it meant to turn pain into purpose. Grieving for Clara was necessary. She deserved every tear, but letting that grief consume her, paralyze her. Clara would never have wanted that. What Clara wanted was what she'd always wanted, to see Emily follow her dreams, use her talents, become the extraordinary person she always believed Emily could be. The next day, Emily changed her approach. She still studied hard, still prepared for exams with utmost seriousness. But now she took the time to eat proper meals with Robert, to tend the garden Clara loved, to occasionally watch a movie or read a book just for fun. More importantly, she began turning her pain into concrete action. She volunteered at a local hospital on weekends, delivering meals, talking to lonely patients, supporting families facing similar situations. It was through this volunteer work that Emily reaffirmed her calling. Every patient comforted, every family consoled, every small act of kindness was a way to honor Clara and all those who had helped her along the way. When it came time to apply for colleges, Emily applied for countless scholarships. She wrote moving yet honest essays about her journey, from the nameless street girl to the determined young woman striving to be a doctor. She didn't use her story to evoke pity, but to show resilience and purpose. Acceptance letters started arriving in spring. Among them was one from the State University, offering her a full merit scholarship. Emily and Robert celebrated with a special dinner, toasting with grape juice the way they had on important occasions since she was a child. "Clara would be so proud," Robert said, tears in his eyes but smiling genuinely. "I'm so proud." "I couldn't have done it without you both," Emily replied, her voice choked. "Everything I am, I owe to you." Robert shook his head. "No, Emily. Clara and I only gave you love and opportunity. Everything else, your determination, your kindness, your strength, was always inside you, even in the alleys when you were just a little girl on your own." His words touched Emily deeply. It was true, even in the darkest moments of her street life, something within her refused to give up. Something that pushed her forward, that made her trust the shelter, that made her open her heart to Clara and Robert. Maybe that inner strength was her real legacy. Not a legacy someone handed down to her, but something that had always been hers alone. Med school was everything Emily hoped, and more. Her years of preparation in high school helped, but nothing could fully prepare her for the intensity of the experience. The theoretical classes were exhausting, cramming her mind with anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and terminology that initially sounded like another language. The practical labs demanded absolute concentration and precision. Studies consumed days and nights, leaving little time for anything else. Then came her first contact with real patients. Emily vividly remembered the first time she entered a hospital room as a med student, wearing her short white coat that identified the newbies. The nerves, the sense of responsibility, the fear of making mistakes. But she also remembered the almost sacred feeling of being able to help someone in a moment of vulnerability. "You have a good way with patients," a professor told her after observing her interact with an elderly woman. Natural, empathetic. Emily simply smiled in thanks, not explaining that her empathy came from a very personal place, knowing what it was like to feel invisible, understanding the value of a kind gesture when you're at rock bottom. The years went by in a whirlwind of shifts, tests, and case presentations. Emily rarely went home except for major holidays, when she made sure to spend a few days with Robert, who now lived alone but stayed active through community groups and engineering projects. "I'm fine," he always said during their weekly video calls. "Proud of you, focused on your future, just like Clara would want." In her third year of med school, Emily faced one of the most challenging moments of her training. During a shift in the emergency department, a little girl was brought in, dirty, malnourished, with frightened eyes that refused to meet any adult's gaze. "Found in a park," explained the social worker who came with her. "She doesn't speak, no documents. We think she's been on the streets for quite some time." Emily felt the world pause for an instant. It was like looking into a mirror of her past, as if, in some way, the girl she once was had materialized before her. Taking a deep breath, she approached the child with extra care. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't demand answers. She simply explained each step of the exam before doing it, asked permission in clear gestures, offered gentle smiles. By the end, the little girl still hadn't spoken, but her body was less tense, her eyes a bit less panicked. "You're good with tough kids," a resident remarked, impressed. Emily just nodded, not correcting him that the child wasn't tough. She was a survivor, as Emily had been. That night, in her small apartment near campus, Emily cried. She cried for that little girl in the hospital, for her own childhood self, for every child lost on the streets. Then, wiping her tears, she did what she always did, turned pain into renewed purpose. The next morning, she signed up for extra shifts in pediatrics. In her rare, quiet moments, Emily still reflected on her journey, from where she came to where she was going. How the hardships she'd faced, even the most painful ones like losing Clara, had somehow shaped her into the person and the doctor she was becoming. In her final year of med school, as she prepared for residency exams, Emily made a decision. She would specialize in emergency medicine. It was the front line where lives could be saved, where people at their most vulnerable got immediate help, where every minute mattered. And maybe, just maybe, one day she'd be there for another street kid who needed not only medical treatment, but that simple look of recognition, the look that said, "I see you as a person, not a problem." When Emily received her medical diploma, Robert was in the front row, applauding with tears in his eyes. Next to him, an empty seat symbolized Clara, present in spirit. At the small celebration after the ceremony, Robert handed her a carefully wrapped gift. It was Clara's. She wanted you to have it when you graduated. With trembling fingers, Emily opened the package. Inside was a high-quality stethoscope and a small card written in Clara's delicate handwriting, "For Emily, who turns pain into healing. With all our love, Mom and Dad." Hugging Robert, the stethoscope between them, Emily felt a profound certainty. The cycle was almost complete. From the nameless street child who was helped, to Dr. Emily, who now could help others, from someone who once desperately needed a helping hand, to someone who now extended her own hands. Every grueling shift, every sleepless night studying, every tear shed along the way, it had all been worth it. Because now she could do for others what so many had done for her, see beyond their circumstances, see the whole person, offer not just technical care but dignity. And so, step by step, pain turned into purpose. Emily moved toward her destiny that began on the streets when she was just a lost little girl, and now led her to help others who, like her, needed someone to reach out at the right moment. The pain of losing Clara would never fully go away. But Emily had learned the most important lesson. Pain, when acknowledged and transformed, becomes the most powerful fuel. And with it, she moved forward, honoring the legacy of love she had received and multiplying it with every patient she cared for. 6 years went by. Time moved with the speed only adult life seems to have. Residency, specialization, her first jobs. The journey was long, but Emily finally reached her goal. Dr. Emily Carter, now 29 years, working in the emergency department at Central Hospital. Her white coat bore her name, embroidered in small blue letters, along with a photo ID badge and the keys to a small office she shared with 2 other newly hired doctors. It wasn't much, but for someone who once had no name, it was almost an empire. That Thursday's shift was especially busy. 3 car accidents, a case of food poisoning, and a string of flu and fever cases that wouldn't relent. Emily moved around the ER with the efficiency her years of training had taught her, quick but not rushed, attentive but not anxious. Dr. Carter to exam room 5. Dr. Carter to exam room 5. The metallic voice from the PA system called her as she finished stitching up a teenager's arm. After a final bandage and quick care instructions, Emily said goodbye to the patient and headed to her next case. On the chart, only the basics. Female patient, approx 7 years old, found unconscious in a park. No documents, no guardian. Emily took a deep breath before pulling back the curtain. Cases involving children always affected her more, especially those with no one to care for them. Professionalism, she reminded herself. That's what the little girl needed right now. But nothing could have prepared her for what she saw. The girl lay on the gurney, so small she seemed to vanish under the hospital sheet. Dark, tangled hair, a dirty face, worn-out clothes too big for her thin body. A nurse was taking her vitals while a social worker filled out paperwork at the foot of the bed. "Vitals are stable, doctor," the nurse reported. "She was dehydrated and hypoglycemic, but we're treating that." She woke briefly but fell back asleep. Emily nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Her throat was suddenly dry, her heart pounding in her chest. With slightly trembling hands that she tried to hide, she approached the girl. It wasn't her appearance alone that shocked her. It was as if Emily were looking at a reflection of her own past, not physically, but on a deeper, more visceral level. The same abandonment, the same vulnerability, the same invisible struggle to survive another day. "How long has she been on the streets?" Emily asked the social worker, forcing herself to sound professional. "We don't know exactly. No one has claimed her. Judging by her condition, maybe weeks, maybe months. Weeks. Months." Emily had spent years. Gently, she began the physical exam. Every movement was careful, respectful. She noticed the small signs most doctors might overlook: calluses on her hands, nails chewed to the quick, little improvised hiding spots in her ripped pockets where she likely stored crumbs. Signs of a survivor, like she had once been. "I'll need more tests," she said, writing in the chart with as steady a hand as possible, "and let me know the moment she wakes." The social worker and nurse nodded, not realizing the emotional storm behind Emily's controlled facade. Emily finished her exam, gave the necessary instructions, and walked out of the exam area with measured steps. She passed the nursing station, turned right down the quieter corridor leading to the lockers. And there, in that short stretch of empty hallway, the walls she had so carefully built around her memories collapsed. Tears came without warning, silent but unstoppable. Emily leaned against the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor, knees drawn to her chest in a position her body remembered from long ago. Her white coat, symbol of everything she'd achieved, now absorbed tears shed for both the little girl on that gurney and for the child she herself had once been. For a moment, she was no longer Dr. Carter. She was just Emily, the nameless street kid, finally letting herself feel the full extent of what she had survived. 3 weeks had passed since she encountered that child from the streets. Emily continued to monitor the girl's case, now placed in social services care. She visited a few times, bringing books and small gifts. She tried to keep emotional distance, but it was impossible. Little Maya, as they had temporarily named her, had awakened something dormant in Emily. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in early November. Surprisingly, the ER at Central Hospital was quiet for a stormy night. Emily had just dealt with an acute asthma case when the emergency doors swung open. Accident victim coming in, multiple traumas, possible internal bleeding, BP dropping. A paramedic shouted, pushing a gurney down the hall. Emily instinctively moved to join the team. Dr. Harrison, the ER chief, was already there, taking charge. Female, about 45, frontal collision with a pole after skidding on the wet road. Brief loss of consciousness at the scene, woke up during transport. BP 90/60 and falling, heart rate 120, O2 sat 94% on supplemental oxygen. As they transferred the patient from the ambulance stretcher to the trauma bed, Emily got her first glimpse of the woman's face. It was partially covered by an oxygen mask, blood from a cut on her forehead staining her features, but something about it felt oddly familiar. An uncomfortable sensation settled deep in her mind. "We'll need an urgent abdominal CT," Harrison said, palpating the woman's distended abdomen. "Possible splenic or liver rupture. Type her blood and get 3 units ready. X-ray chest and pelvis. Dr. Carter. Insert the central line, please." Emily stepped up with the central line kit. While a nurse cut away the patient's blouse, a metallic object swung to the side, previously hidden by blood-stained fabric. A silver pendant with a clear stone in the center. The world seemed to stop. The noise around her, monitors beeping, the team shouting orders, the constant hum of the hospital turned into a distant buzz. Emily froze, eyes locked on that pendant. The stone, which subtly changed color under the hospital lights, now seemed sky blue. "Dr. Takata, the central line." Harrison's voice brought her back. "Sorry." She forced herself to move, to remain professional while her mind processed what she was seeing. It couldn't be. After all these years, was it just a coincidence? How many silver pendants with bluish stones were there in the world? With hands slightly trembling, Emily inserted the catheter into the patient's jugular vein. As she worked, she observed the woman's face more closely. It was older, lined, hair different, but patient's name, Emily asked, trying to keep her voice firm. Driver's license found at the scene. A nurse passed a plastic ID card to another for record. Grace Lawson, 47. Grace. The second impact was even greater than the first. Emily felt her legs buckle for a moment, but she stayed upright. Professionalism above all, the patient, Grace, needed her now. CT scan shows a splenic laceration with active bleeding and a small hemoperitoneum, the radiologist announced, stepping into the trauma room with the images. She needs surgery now, Harrison said. Page the general surgeon, Dr. Wells should be on call, he instructed. Dr. Wells left for an emergency at East Hospital, multi-vehicle accident, replied the head nurse. Dr. Ramirez is covering, but he's in the middle of a complicated gallbladder surgery. Harrison frowned, thinking quickly. How long until Ramirez is free? At least an hour, maybe more. She doesn't have an hour, Emily intervened, her voice surprisingly steady. Her BP keeps falling even with fluids. The bleeding's accelerating. Harrison glanced at her, assessing the situation. Emily was relatively new on staff, but she'd completed a general surgery residency before specializing in emergency care. It wasn't unusual for ED physicians with surgical training to step in when needed. Do you feel comfortable operating, Dr. Carter? The question hung in the air for a second. Emily looked at Grace, unconscious again, pale. Her silver pendant now spattered with drops of blood, the same pendant that once shone for her on a distant night, when she was just a hungry girl on the streets. The woman who had changed her destiny with one act of kindness was now depending on her. Yes, sir. I'm ready. 40 minutes later, Emily was in the OR, suited up, standing over Grace's open abdomen. A splenectomy was a procedure she'd performed many times during her residency. Technically, it wasn't complicated for someone with her skills, but she had never operated on someone who meant so much to her. More bleeding than expected, the scrub nurse noted, suctioning blood from the surgical field. Emily nodded, staying focused. Her hands worked with precision, isolating and ligating the main splenic vessels before removing the damaged spleen. Every movement was deliberate, each choice made with a clarity that even surprised herself. BP stabilizing, the anesthesiologist announced. Great job, doctor. 2 hours later, Emily closed the last layer of the incision. The procedure was a success. The damaged spleen was removed, bleeding controlled, Grace's vitals stable. We'll move her to ICU for the next 24 hours, Emily instructed the team. I want immediate updates on any changes. As she removed her gloves and surgical mask, a nurse approached. Do you know her? The patient. Emily hesitated, unsure how to answer. How could she explain that this woman was the reason she stood there today, wearing that white coat, saving lives? Yes, she answered simply. From a long time ago. After the surgery, Emily didn't go home, even though her shift was over. She stayed at the hospital, monitoring Grace's vitals, reviewing scans, checking every detail of her recovery. Early the next morning, the ICU doctor told her Grace was beginning to awaken from the anesthesia. Emily, who had dozed off in the doctor's lounge chair, immediately went to her bedside. Grace was pale, connected to tubes and monitors. Her hair, now threaded with grey, spread across the pillow. The pendant had been removed for surgery, kept with her personal belongings. Emily pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed, watching the woman's face, seeking the connection to the distant memory she held. Yes, it was her. The same eyes, closed now. The same gentle contours of the face, now with more lines. The same presence that, even in silence, gave off an inexplicable calm. Slowly, Grace's eyes began to flicker beneath her lids. After a moment, they opened, disoriented at first, then gradually focusing on the ceiling, the walls, and finally on Emily. Hello, Emily said softly. I'm Dr. Carter. You're at Central Hospital. You were in a car accident and needed surgery, but you're going to be okay." Grace tried to speak, but her throat was dry from the intubation. Emily offered her some ice chips, which she accepted with a slight nod. The accident," Grace managed after a moment, her voice rough. "The rain. I slid." "Yes," Emily confirmed. "Your car hit a pole. You had internal bleeding from a splenic injury, but we operated and the bleeding's under control. You'll be fine." Grace nodded weakly, too tired to say more. Still, her eyes stayed on Emily as if trying to decipher something. "Rest now," Emily said, adjusting her pillow. "I'll be around if you need anything." Throughout the day, Emily checked on Grace frequently. Between her other patients, the woman slept most of the time, still recovering from the combined effects of trauma and surgery. Each visit, Emily checked vitals, adjusted meds, and paused for a moment to simply look at this face that meant so much. By late afternoon, Emily entered the room to find Grace awake, propped up a bit higher in bed, appearing more alert. "How are you feeling?" she asked, reviewing the heart monitor. "Like I got run over," Grace answered with a small, brave smile. "But better than before, thank you, doctor." Emily hesitated, her heart racing. Was this the right time? Should she say something? How did one explain what this woman meant to her without sounding completely out of left field? Making a decision, Emily opened the bedside drawer and removed the silver pendant, which she'd asked the nurses to keep there, ready to be returned. "This is yours," she said, handing it to Grace. The woman's eyes lit up at the sight of the pendant. "My lucky charm. I thought I'd lost it in the crash." "It's very pretty," Emily commented, noticing how Grace ran her thumb over the stone, just like she did so many years ago. The stone changes color with the light. "It was my grandmother's gift," Grace explained, gazing at the pendant fondly. "She used to say it was a piece of the sky, to remind me always to look up, even on tough days." The same words. Emily felt her breath catch for a moment. It wasn't just the pendant that was real. Everything about that night she had cherished was real, down to the details. Grace studied Emily more closely now, tilting her head slightly. "I'm sorry, but have we met? Your face seems familiar somehow." Emily sat on the edge of the bed, gathering her courage. She took Grace's hand in hers, feeling the contrast between her younger skin and the older woman's. 23 years had passed since that night in the alley. "You helped me once. Now it was my turn to help you." Grace frowned, confused. Her eyes roamed Emily's face, searching for a connection, a memory. I don't recall when I might have helped a doctor," she said hesitantly. "It wasn't a doctor you helped," Emily said softly. "It was a little girl, a long time ago, in an alley behind an Italian restaurant. You took her to eat at a 24-hour diner and gave her a silver blanket." Grace's eyes widened, a spark of recognition igniting in them. Her hand tightened around Emily's. "You?" Emily nodded, tears forming. "I didn't have a name back then. I had nothing. You were the first person who saw me and really saw me." Grace lifted her free hand to cover her mouth, stunned. "My God, the little girl in the alley. I've thought about you so many times over the years. I always wondered what happened, if you were okay." "I'm okay," Emily smiled through her tears. "I'm really okay, and I'm here because you were there that night." Even in her weakened state, Grace tried to sit straighter, her eyes never leaving Emily's. Tears were there too now. How is this possible?" Emily clasped Grace's hand more firmly. "It's a long story, but I have time to tell it if you want to hear." Grace nodded, amazement clear on her face. "Please, I want to know everything." As evening fell outside the hospital windows, Emily started telling her tale. The shelter, the adoption, school, medical school. At each stage of the story, Grace squeezed her hand as though to confirm it was real, that this extraordinary moment was truly happening. "So, you became a doctor. To give back," Grace murmured when Emily paused. "To give back, yes. To do for others what you and so many people did for me. To be the difference in someone's life, like you were in mine." Grace looked again at the pendant, then back at Emily. There was something in her eyes, a profound recognition, as if she could finally see the frightened child within the confident doctor. "Your eyes," Grace whispered. "There's something so familiar about them." Emily smiled, understanding. Despite all the changes, all the transformations, something remained, an essence of that first bond between two souls who met on a cold night so many years ago. "Rest now," Emily said gently, adjusting the covers around Grace. "We'll talk more tomorrow. I have so much to tell you, and this time we won't lose touch." Grace squeezed her hand one last time before closing her eyes, exhausted but wearing a slight smile. The silver pendant lay on her chest, its stone catching the soft glow of the hospital lights. Emily stayed for a few minutes, watching the woman who had unknowingly changed the course of her life. A circle had closed. The nameless street girl had become the doctor saving her benefactor's life. The repayment was complete. But Emily knew this was just the beginning of a new journey. Morning brought a fresh clarity to the hospital room. Gentle beams of sunlight filtered through the half-open blinds, casting golden lines on the floor and the white walls. It was Grace's third day in the hospital, and her recovery was going well. Emily entered the room carrying a small bouquet of yellow daisies. She wasn't on duty, but she came specifically to see Grace. The flowers were a personal touch, something beyond the typical doctor-patient relationship. Crossing into a territory they were still defining. Grace was sitting up in bed, pillows propped behind her. The post-op pallor was starting to fade, replaced by a faint blush on her cheeks. Her grayish-brown hair was tied back in a makeshift bun, and she flipped through a magazine without much interest. When she saw Emily, her face lit up. "Good morning," Emily smiled, placing the flowers in a vase on the bedside table. Brought a bit of color for the room. "They're lovely," Grace replied, watching her with a new intensity. The initial post-surgery confusion had given way to sharper awareness, a deeper recognition growing each hour. Emily glanced over the chart at the foot of the bed, reading the nurse's notes from the night shift. "Your vitals look great. The incision is healing well. How's the pain today?" "Manageable," Grace answered, but her eyes never left Emily's face. There was something in her gaze, a curiosity, a searching. Emily felt the weight of that gaze as she tidied the flowers, straightened the table, checked the IV drip, routine doctorly movements that helped steady her trembling hands. They'd talked briefly the night before, but Grace had still been under the influence of pain meds. Too drowsy to fully process Emily's extraordinary revelation. Today was different. Today, both were fully present. "You're not on shift today, are you?" Grace asked, noticing the absence of Emily's white coat replaced by a simple blouse and jeans. "No," Emily admitted, finally sitting in the chair beside the bed. "I just came to see you." A moment of silence stretched between them, not awkward but charged with meaning, with possibilities. "About last night," Emily began, uncertain how to proceed. "So it wasn't a dream," Grace gently interrupted. "When I woke up this morning, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. That the medication had made me confuse things." Emily shook her head. "It wasn't a dream." Grace held out her hand, a silent invitation that Emily accepted, intertwining their fingers. For a long moment, Grace just looked at Emily, studying every detail of her face with the intensity of someone trying to connect present and past, the doctor to the hungry child from so long ago. "You have the eyes of that girl," Grace finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something in those words shattered the final barrier. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and a trembling smile appeared on her lips. Nothing else needed to be said. That simple phrase confirmed everything. Grace truly remembered. The connection was real, and the extraordinary path that led them to this hospital room was not just Emily's imagination. The silence that followed spoke volumes. Hands clasped, gazes locked, synchronized breathing, everything pointing to a reunion that transcended words. A nearly tangible tenderness filled the air, as if the universe had paused to let this circle close. "I kept the blanket," Emily finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "All these years," Grace squeezed her hand, "and I never forgot your face. For years, I went back to that neighborhood, asking about a little dark-haired girl, but people came and went. No one knew you. Emily swallowed hard, picturing Grace returning to those same alleys, those same streets, searching for a child who was no longer there. "A few weeks after we met, I fainted near a market," Emily explained. "A social worker found me and took me to a shelter. That's when my life started to change." Grace listened attentively, her eyes never leaving Emily's. There was a hunger in her gaze, for this story, for these missing pieces that filled decades of wondering. "Was the shelter a good place?" Emily nodded. "Yes. Clean. Safe. There were kind people there. A woman named Ms. Martha, especially. She had a special way with scared kids like me. And after that? Then came the best part," Emily smiled, wiping a tear. "Clara and Robert adopted me, an amazing couple who gave me a home, a family. Clara was the one who named me Emily." Grace smiled. "Emily, it suits you. They changed my life, gave me stability, education, love. Robert's still alive, but Clara—" Emily paused, the pain still fresh. "Clara died of cancer when I was in high school." Grace squeezed her hand in quiet sympathy. "It was hard," Emily continued, "but something Clara always said was that I knew how to turn pain into purpose, and she was right. Her death only strengthened my resolve to become a doctor." Emily paused to gather her thoughts. There was so much to tell, so many years to compress into words. "I never forgot that gesture of yours. After that night, I was adopted. And I decided I wanted to be a doctor so I could help people, like you helped me." The words felt like a confession, simple and sincere. Grace closed her eyes, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. When she opened them again, they were filled with an emotion Emily couldn't fully name: pride, joy, and maybe some disbelief at the mysterious ways life unfolds. "I had no idea," Grace murmured. "I never imagined that night would mean so much." "How could you know?" Emily smiled. "For you, it was just a moment of kindness among many, I imagine." Grace shook her head. "No, it wasn't just a moment. That night changed something in me too, Emily." It was the first time Grace said her name, and the sound had an intimate ring to it, like a secret word only they shared. "After that night," Grace went on, "I started thinking more about kids like you. About how many must be out there, alone, hungry. I began donating to shelters, first small amounts, then bigger ones once my finances improved." Emily listened in surprise. She had never considered that her brief encounter could have impacted Grace as well. "10 years ago, I started a foundation," Grace revealed. "We fund food programs and temporary housing for children on the streets." Emily felt herself overwhelmed with emotion. Their circle was more complete than she ever imagined. Not only had Emily dedicated her life to repaying Grace's kindness, but Grace had been doing the same, multiplying that first act into an ongoing wave of help for other kids. "The New Dawn Center?" Emily asked, suddenly making the connection. The center was well known at the hospital. Many vulnerable children were referred there. Grace nodded. "Yes, it's my main project now." "I've referred patients there," Emily said, amazed at the coincidence. "I never knew it had anything to do with you." "The world is smaller than we think," Grace smiled. "Or maybe some meetings really are written in the stars." A nurse came in to check Grace's vitals, briefly interrupting. Emily used the moment to collect herself, to process everything she was learning. When they were alone again, Grace resumed. "Tell me more about your life, Emily. I want to know everything." And Emily did. She told her about the years with Clara and Robert, the challenges of adapting, how she learned to trust again. She talked about school, friends, academic struggles. She described the pain of losing Clara and how it almost derailed her dreams, but ultimately strengthened her resolve. She spoke of med school, the grueling nights of residency, her work in emergency medicine. Finally, she shared stories of her patients, especially the vulnerable children who always touched her heart in a special way. Grace listened with unwavering attention, taking in every detail, occasionally asking questions that revealed not just curiosity, but a deep desire to truly know the woman that lost little girl had become. "What about that girl you treated recently? The one who made you cry in the hallway?" Grace asked, recalling a detail Emily had mentioned briefly the day before. Emily sighed. Maya, she reminded me so much of myself. It was like seeing my past in a mirror. She's in the system now, but I've been following the case. It's not easy finding families for older kids. A thoughtful silence ensued. Then Grace said, "My foundation has a mentorship program for kids like her. Maybe we could help once I'm out of here." Emily felt something stir inside her, an idea, a possibility, a new beginning. "What if we did more?" she proposed, her voice speeding with excitement. "What if we combined my medical knowledge with your social programs? We could create something specifically for street kids. Preventive care, nutritional support, psychological help." Grace sat up straighter, ignoring a brief twinge of pain, her eyes shining. "An integrated program," she added, picking up the idea and expanding it. "Not just treating illnesses, but preventing them, seeing the child as a whole, not just their symptoms." "Exactly," Emily said, animated. "I could recruit colleagues, form a volunteer medical team. You have the administrative background, social worker contacts. We could start as a pilot project," Grace continued, her enthusiasm obvious. "Maybe a mobile clinic, to reach kids who won't come to us, then expand from there." The conversation flowed in a flurry of ideas that felt predestined. It was as if every experience in Emily's life, every skill in Grace's, had been developed precisely for this moment of convergence. It wasn't just gratitude driving them. It was something more, a shared purpose born of separate paths that now united. "Grace," Emily said, taking both of the older woman's hands, "when you mentioned some meetings are written in the stars, I think you were right. There's no way it's just coincidence that you ended up in my ERA on my operating table after all these years." Grace smiled, squeezing Emily's hands. "It's not coincidence, Emily. It's the closing of a circle that started that night in the diner. And the start of a new one," Emily added. "In that moment, doctor and patient, benefactor and beneficiary, grown woman and the child she once was, all those labels blurred away. They were just two people looking at each other, with a profound recognition of souls that, in some mysterious way, had always been connected. The past no longer had to be a shadow or a mystery. It was there, revealed between them, illuminated by love and gratitude that transcended time. And the future, this new path they were charting, shone bright with possibility." "You know what Clara used to tell me?" Emily asked softly after a moment's pause. "What?" "That family isn't just about blood ties. It's about people who come into your life, sometimes briefly, but leave lasting marks on your heart." Grace nodded, a solitary tear sliding down her cheek. "She must have been a very wise woman, your Clara." "She was," Emily agreed. "And she would have loved to meet you, the woman who saved the little girl who became her daughter." The two women remained like that for a long time, hands entwined, eyes connected, hearts open. In the quiet hospital room lit by the morning sun, the past met the present, weaving the first threads of a new future together. A future in which that first meal shared in a diner all those years ago would continue to nourish not just their lives, but the lives of countless children who, like Emily, only needed someone to stop and ask, "Are you hungry?" 2 years passed since that reunion at the hospital. 2 springs, 2 autumns, 2 full cycles of the sun, bringing with them a friendship that blossomed with the ease of something always meant to be. Emily and Grace became inseparable, not like teenagers who cling to each other constantly, but in a more mature, deeper way. The kind of bond that doesn't need daily contact to stay alive, though they chose to see each other often. Weekly dinners at one house or the other, text messages during the day, sharing small victories or frustrations, late-night calls when Emily left a tough shift needing Grace's calming voice to remind her why she did what she did. "You saved another one today," Grace would say during those calls, her voice like a balm. "You're making a difference, Emily." Making a difference. That was what both of them were working toward now, together. The project they had envisioned in the hospital room 2 years earlier now had a name, a structure, and far more reach than they had ever imagined. The New Path Medical Center, a community clinic specializing in care for at-risk children and teenagers. What started as a basic healthcare service soon expanded to include psychological counseling, nutritional guidance, academic support, and mentorship programs. Grace put her administrative experience and contacts to work. Emily recruited fellow doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals willing to donate a few hours each week. Robert, Emily's adoptive father, now retired, volunteered 3 times a week, teaching math and science to kids who rarely got individual attention in school. The project grew organically, drawing supporters through transparency and clear results. In 2 years, more than 300 children had been served. Some came once and never returned. Others became regulars, forming bonds with the staff. Maya, the girl Emily had treated just before reuniting with Grace, was among the first beneficiaries. Now, nearly 10, she'd been adopted by a couple who learned of the center through a public awareness campaign. Emily saw her regularly for checkups, marveling at how the frightened child had turned into a confident, chatty kid. One Thursday afternoon, Emily left the center earlier than usual. An appointment had been cancelled, leaving a rare free slot in her packed schedule. She decided to take a short walk before hopping on the subway home, enjoying the mild early fall weather. The center was in an area of the city that wasn't the poorest, but still had pockets of hardship among renovated buildings and emerging businesses. A neighborhood in flux, where families struggled to keep up with rising rents, and small family-run shops stood beside trendy cafes. Emily walked absent-mindedly, thinking about the upcoming meeting with Grace the next day to discuss expanding the dental program, when something, or someone, caught her attention. A little girl sat alone on the sidewalk, in front of a closed store. She seemed no older than 7. She wore simple but clean clothes, though the coat was clearly too large for her small frame. Her dark hair was pulled into a makeshift ponytail, and she was hugging her knees to her chest, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. Emily slowed her pace, observing. The child didn't look like she was begging. She didn't have the vacant expression of someone who'd been there for a long time. It was more like she was waiting for someone, or maybe just found a place to rest. Years of working with vulnerable children had sharpened Emily's instincts. Something about the girl's posture, the quick way her eyes scanned every passerby, hinted at constant alertness, survival mode. Emily knew she should be cautious. Approaching a child on the street might scare her, or worse, seem suspicious to other adults. But she also knew what fear and hunger did to a child. She knew because she remembered. Trusting her gut, Emily approached slowly, keeping her movements non-threatening. She stayed a respectful distance and smiled gently. "Hi," she said in a soft voice. The girl looked up, instantly guarded. Her big, dark brown eyes took in Emily, evaluating her with the lightning speed only a child of the streets develops. "Are you waiting for someone?" Emily asked, keeping her voice quiet. The girl didn't answer, just kept watching her, not exactly afraid, but definitely cautious. Emily noticed the slightly hollow cheeks, the thin wrists, the nervous feet inside worn-out sneakers. She saw her own story repeating before her eyes. "Are you hungry?" The words came out naturally, as if they had a life of their own, as if the universe was once again closing a circle through them. The girl hesitated, clearly torn between need and distrust. Finally, she gave a small nod. Emily smiled and took from her bag a wrapped cheese sandwich and a small water bottle she'd bought on her way to work, but hadn't used. She held them out to the girl without moving closer. "It's cheese," she said, indicating the sandwich. "Do you like cheese?" Another slight nod. "Go ahead. I won't get any closer if you don't want me to." The girl leaned forward, snatched the food and water quickly, then retreated, never taking her eyes off Emily. "My name is Emily," she said, sitting on the sidewalk but keeping several feet between them. "I'm a doctor at the new Path Center over there. Have you heard of it?" The girl shook her head no, carefully unwrapping the sandwich, inspecting it before taking a small bite. "It's a nice place," Emily continued. "There are doctors, teachers, people who help kids. If you ever want to stop by, it's the yellow building with the tree painted on the front." Emily didn't push, didn't ask invasive questions. She just sat there, letting the girl eat in peace, offering information that might help if and when she was ready. After a few minutes, when the child had eaten half the sandwich, she spoke for the first time. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Emily smiled. "Everyone needs some help sometimes." A comfortable silence settled. Emily watched city life flow around them, people rushing home from work, cyclists weaving through traffic, a street vendor packing up his stall. She remembered her own childhood on these same streets, how huge and hostile the world felt. "I have to go now," Emily said eventually, standing up. "But I'll be at the center tomorrow if you decide to come by." "No pressure." The girl nodded, eyes down, focused on finishing the sandwich. Emily started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and there's always a snack there, just so you know." A tiny smile curved the girl's lips, so quick Emily almost missed it. On her way to the subway, Emily sent a text to Grace. "I just met a girl who reminded me so much of myself. Hope she shows up at the center. We'll need more sandwiches tomorrow." The reply came almost immediately. "I'll be there with sandwiches. Big hug." Emily smiled at her phone, feeling that familiar wave of gratitude for the friendship she had found, or rediscovered, so unexpectedly. That simple act at dusk, a sandwich, a kind word, a hand extended without demanding anything in return, was small compared to the massive challenges kids like that faced. Emily knew that better than anyone. But she also knew how powerful a small gesture could be, how it could plant a seed of hope that, with the right timing and care, would grow into something larger, stronger, more lasting. After all, wasn't that how it was for her? A burger, a silver blanket, a look of human acknowledgement, and her entire life changed course. The cycle renewed itself, the wheel kept turning. Two lives that crossed by chance one night, so long ago, now worked together to change the world. Not all at once, not with grand gestures or instant solutions, but gradually, genuinely, one child at a time. Emily looked at the early evening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. She thought of Grace's pendant, the stone that seemed like a piece of the sky, of how people came and went in our lives, sometimes briefly, sometimes to stay, but always leaving a part of themselves behind. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.